Now, funny enough, this was one that I was really excited to talk about because if you look at all of the fights that have come across us in the last little bit here, it's all about the prospect. It's all about the newcomers. It's all about the up-and-coming fighters. But now when I'm looking at this fight, right, Matt Brown versus Dhiego Lima, can you believe it, right? This is a great fight for the old school fans. And you know what really threw me off about this one? Dhiego Lima is just 31 years old. I feel like I've been watching that guy fight since I was like 20 something. I'm already 33. So for him to be 31, like in my brain, I'm like, I was way off because he'd been fighting as like a baby. But man, that's really cool to see. I think that his fights sometimes dictate a lot more worse for wear than they need to be. I mean, we can talk about the Belal Muhammad fight, right? Just went up against a more speedier, better boxer. I think that he did everything he could with his leg kicks. He throws 1-2s, but he doesn't really string many punches together. And the big part of it, because he kind of throws with power, it seems like he gets, over the course of the fight, they take a lot out of him. And so you don't see much more than the 1-2s and the leg kicks, things like that. And I think in a fight against a guy like Belal Muhammad, you really saw that exploited a bit because Belal looked absolutely game to just push forward, take whatever was coming his way, use head movement, but just land big to the body and to the head. That's the coolest thing about Belal's game, right? The way he's able to fill that boxing frame, body up top. That's what makes him so good, right? Now, when you look at these two guys like Matt Brown, I mean, the cool thing about Matt Brown is it's just his career in the UFC is Hall of Fame level, in my opinion. But I hate to say that he's probably on the hot seat right now. You think about his recent fights with guys like Beza and Condit, you know, you can maybe give him a bit of a bump with Beza being such a big UFC prospect, especially at the time of that fight. Then with Condit, it was like he had so many good moments in that fight, especially with the takedowns against a guy like Condit, who we've seen struggle there. But at the end of the day, the damage was done. I felt like Condit was just a more versatile striker, was getting a lot of body kicks in there to slow Brown down. Damage was obviously on the face a lot more. So all the little things that you have to do right against Matt Brown, I felt like Condit really did that. It was attacking the body, doing any type of damage you can do up against the fence, land big shots to maybe slow him down. Now in this fight, I think Lima with that leg kick is going to be really in a good place, right? Because when you think about Belal being able to just walk forward and things like that, that makes sense. I think Matt Brown can take damage from almost anybody, but the idea is that when Matt Brown slows, it becomes easier to beat him. It's just, he's a man where if he's able to feed off of the energy and feed off of the pain that he's feeling, this guy just gets better with every round, right? You look at the way he fought in the third round against Condit, I thought that was absolutely phenomenal. And, you know, you even go back in his career, I mean, this is more than 5 years ago now, but in 2016, he had the worst year of his career going 0-3 against guys like Cerrone, Damian Maia, and Jake Ellenberger. But then just before that, you know, we saw one of the most legendary runs of a 30-plus-year-old, you know, 34, 35, around there. But he went 7-0 to earn himself a #1 contender shot at the welterweight division. And he loses to Robbie Lawler, who ends up going on to winning the title and having one of the most amazing runs that we'll remember to date. But you have to think about just how good Matt Brown was 5 years ago, you know, before that little run there with maybe the mental part of the game and having worked that hard to finally get to a title shot at almost 35 years old, maybe caught up to him, right? So after that, it's kind of been a back and forth. He definitely seems like he's on his last little, you know, hurrah, if you will. But I think that he has an opportunity here to prove himself, right? What are the few things that we see from Lima? I think that body shots, things like that could affect him. Cardio over the course of 3 rounds alone seems to really affect him, especially with guys that continuously push forward. And Matt Brown actually has pretty good cardio and can push forward. Now, the only way to slow him down is attack the legs, attack the body. This guy will wear as much damage as you want him to on the face. So I think from a skills and game plan perspective, it really looks like Dhiego Lima can put something together here to get him in those good books with the UFC and start to look for better fights. You know, for him to kick off 2021 after such a long layoff against the Belal Muhammad is a big deal. So I think that is a fight where if he can build off of a respectable loss, it's going to take his UFC career to the right level, especially with his brother doing so well out there with Bellator. Now, even going a bit further into his kind of career leading into it, right? Tough 25, the comeback stories. He ends up fighting Jesse Taylor. You know, everybody loves Jesse Taylor because he's such a meathead back in the day, but that's kind of a sad story, right? You see Dhiego go into the final. He ends up losing to Jesse Taylor, but before Taylor can even get a fight in the UFC, he already gets the boot for testing positive and getting, an USADA violation pegged on him. So little things like that really kind of, I just have zero respect for that kind of thing. So, the one thing for me, it's Bilal had such a speed factor, whereas I think Lima now can rid himself of that type of a mismatch, and now he's going to get someone that he can kind of stand and bang with. The things that I do kind of fear for him is that he doesn't really throw with that volume, right? Like, and he doesn't really push forward so much. So with facing a guy like Matt Brown, who kind of starts cold and gets into it, and the more blood he sees on his face, the more he's into the fight, that's what you want to stop. If Dhiego Lima can just go buck wild in that first round to try and do so much damage to the point where he either gets a finish or can come back into the second to really put it on him and even get a close decision, if he stays disciplined in that third, those are the areas where from a game plan perspective, you have to consider it. Because if you're going to go into a fight and just stand and bang with Matt Brown on the feet, that's going to be a hard fight for anybody. And I think even now, he's got such a good array of strikes to throw at you. He brings in the kicks. He's got good elbows in close. All those little things you want to see a fighter do right. Matt Brown's been doing it right. Now, everybody's human, right? How does he lose? Well, a lot of body shots. I think Dhiego Lima with the calf kicks that he landed so much against Bilal, throwing to the body where we've seen Matt Brown really crumble against good fighters. Those are where I can kind of see this going Dhiego Lima's way. And to be quite honest, I mean, if Matt Brown avoids all these big strikes, I can only imagine what these lines are even looking like, right? Paths to victory, when I look at them, it's like cardio, distance striking, punish the body, and moving as quick as possible with Dhiego Lima. But then with Matt Brown, it's like outlast whatever gas tank he might have in the first or second rounds, and then just take the fight over with durability, heart, and just sheer determination, which is how you describe Matt Brown's game. So let's take a quick look at these lines here. I'm pretty excited to look at these ones specifically because I can kind of see Dhiego Lima having an edge only because he's younger. He just fought Bilal Muhammad, and we're talking about a Matt Brown who definitely crumbles against recently good fighters. And, even some of the wins that he's pulled off, I think, are against guys that they were at the perfect time for him to kind of retraject his UFC career. So looking at wow. I mean, I didn't expect it to be this big, I'll be honest with you, but I guess that's maybe where Vegas is seeing Matt Brown's career going. But Matt Brown opened as a plus 160. Love that the line's moving the other way, so people are definitely down to bet Matt Brown at a plus 160, moving it down to pretty much that plus 135 to plus 145 range, with Dhiego Lima opening as a minus 185 and now looking at a minus 170, minus 175. So that fight actually opened up worse. It's getting closer in terms of lines. Let's see how the pundits and all the, experienced gamblers might go with this line and see what direction they push it in. But for me, just like the last fight, I mean, this is going to be weight. I mean, I feel like the last two are really going to be weigh-in based bets or decisions, especially with Rocky Martinez and Josh Parisian. There's just a lot of size, a lot of age, a lot of experience that you can take into consideration on the fly there. And so I'm excited for that one, man. If you look at all the fights, it's basically prospects or up-and-comers, and then bang, we got Dhiego Lima and Matt Brown. So get excited to finish off the prelims with that. And now we're getting into the main card, guys. And it's really funny, right? For me, looking at this main card, the very first fight, I thought to myself, we just went through so many amazing fights with prospects and even some classical guys that we can really look forward to watching. But here we go, first fight on the main card, guys that maybe, some of the more hardcore fans are aware of, but, Bruno Silva has never fought in the UFC yet. And Wellington Turman is still kind of on the come up as a big time prospect. And he's kind of had some mixed showings in the UFC, but always exciting, which is where you can kind of see the UFC try to, go with their luck in building some big fighters here for the division. But when you look at some of the things that we've seen from Turman, I mean, I think that he's such an improving striker that some of the fights he's been in is just kind of tough goes, right? You talk about the Carl Robertson fight. I mean, to be honest, to get a split decision against the better striker in that fight was probably a win in the grand scheme of things. You don't really lose in MMA, you just learn. And I think in this case, that was a huge feat for him. And you talk about that improving striking and how he's able to roll on the ground. Those are the things that I really like about his game. I think that this would be a tough fight to stand and bang with Bruno Silva, who seems to be a very powerful guy. Those big looping hooks, charges in very, very hard, likes to throw like running knees and, follows that up with like some good combos. And I think that that's those little things that you kind of see a little unorthodox from his game, M1 champion, like we mentioned in 2018. But this is kind of the dark side to his story. But once he became the M1 champion in 2018, he was supposed to make his way to the UFC. He was supposed to fight Darren Wynn, but unfortunately, USADA kind of caught him red-handed, and because he wasn't able to provide any type of evidence or supporting documentation to show why this happened the way it did, he was basically given the two years clean without any chance of parole, as they say. But I mean, I think that this is, I don't really go for like fighters like that on a personal level, but I think from an exciting perspective, the UFC does see a lot in him, and putting him on the main card against a guy like Wellington Turman, who seems to always be an exciting fight, is a great decision to try and build some of these fighters up, especially for the Brazilian fans. But, I really do want to see Wellington Turman do a bit better here. And when you look at the way he's lost in the past in the UFC, I mean, it really does come down to defense and protection, right? I think he's a little too confident in his chin. He's a little too confident in just his skills overall to kind of take the damage that he does. I mean, I really want to talk about the Andrew Sanchez quickly, because that was a situation where you just saw classical, kicks being thrown without protecting the upper side of the body very well. And I mean, Aaron Sanchez just kept landing 1-2s. And on the third one, he just went all in, and Wellington was not coming back from that. And it's those little situations where you're wondering just how well he's been able to kind of conform to the UFC level. You've seen him struggle in the stand-up game, but then also be somewhat successful when the fight does get to the ground. He's great at rolling with people's transitions. I think he's great at getting, very opportune positions for him to kind of execute some of his game. But you even look at the way Carl Robertson was able to roll out of, some of his work from the bottom. And I mean, those are the things where if you're a BJJ guy, you really want to be able to control that, top position as long as possible if you have to get back up and start banging with some of these killers. And the big thing with Silva that I really did enjoy about his fighting is that he does have the ability to kind of take the fight anywhere. It's just he seems to work with more power than technique. You look at the Artem Frolov fight, the big thing in there is that he has had to train for 5-round fights for M1. He went 4 rounds there and was able to finish on the ground via ground and pound. But that's where I'm kind of curious to see where this one goes, because when you look at the way Turman has fought in the last few bouts, I think that if his striking comes along, he should be able to defend himself quite a bit up top. And I think if it goes the distance, he should have the upper hand here, even with Bruno training for those bigger rounds, because a 2-year layoff, now coming to the UFC, I just think it's different competition. And you go look at the highlight reel of Bruno Silva, and I can honestly say that Wellington Turman is probably better than every fighter he's fought so far. So with that said, it really makes you consider where this line should be, who should really be the kind of favorite, because in my opinion, whether it's people not knowing who Bruno Silva is or seeing Wellington Turman, as such a young prospect making his way up in the UFC already, you kind of want to give him that edge, right? And that's what I was saying. His worst showing was most certainly the Andrew Sanchez fight, where he really didn't have anything going for him, and hands down, a couple combos put him right out. And that's what he has to look out for with Bruno Silva, because Bruno Silva is going to be rushing forward, throw big hooks with knees coming into the body right after. I think if he's able to avoid those big shots, especially early in the fight, and maybe Bruno is trying to go absolutely for broke because it's his UFC debut and he wants to be exciting. So all those little things I think are going to play a big role in just how to control this fight for both Turman and Silva, because I think for Silva, keeping the fight standing and try to bang it out makes the most sense. There is a lot of tape on Wellington Turman to see how he is, beatable on the feet. And if he can keep the fight standing, I think Turman is going to be a little bit more out of his, comfort zone than he would be, say, on the ground, even with another Brazilian and Bruno Silva. So let's take a quick look at the lines. I think that this is going to be an interesting one. I just see Turman being, at least from an opening perspective, being in the UFC, getting all the excitement as a big prospect, it just makes sense for him to be a favorite. So let's take a look. Right now, Bruno Silva opened as a plus 145 dog and is now sitting between the minus 135 and minus 145 favorite range. Wellington Turman is now sitting at a plus 110 after opening as a minus 170 favorite. So with that said, I mean, we can talk about it just looking at tape, finding out who Bruno Silva really is. I mean, you go look at it and the guy looks absolutely ferocious. And I think that's where you're going to see a lot of the line movement, because there's just not much to go on. I think that you look at his M1 tape, you look at the highlight reel, you look at how he finishes. He's just a very powerful guy. And now I'm wondering if a guy like Wellington Turman, who's maybe worked on his striking, can actually give him a bit more bang for his buck, because when you look at this lines from, Vegas language perspective, it's pretty crazy to think that Wellington Turman has gone from a almost minus 200 favorite to basically, at some places a plus 130 underdog. That's a significant line jump for a fight that most people aren't probably watching after 263. And, for it to just be right after that, it's kind of crazy to see that much line movement. So, like I said, line movement is probably one of the most exciting factors, even if you're not a gambler, because it just shows you where the public opinion is. So take that with a grain of salt. It's probably going to be crazy exciting. I don't know where you want to go with that one. Keep a lookout for Instagram for the final picks and obviously the Super Saiyan pick, because we're 2-0 so far. We're going to keep that rolling. And with that said, these last 4 fights are absolutely beautiful. I can't get over how great the matchmaking is for these ones. And so let's just jump right into it, right? Julian Erosa and Seung Woo Choi. You've probably heard me talk about Julian Erosa like he's one of my favorite fighters, and he absolutely is. His tough season with Conor and Uriah, best season out there in terms of comedy. Artem actually ended up beating him in the tough season. But, I really think this is going to be a dark horse for fight of the night. And, even if it's, a performance of the night for whichever fighter wins, that's a very likely scenario too. So when you break down Julian Erosa, right, what do we love? The durability, the heart. The kid just goes for broke. And again, I've mentioned it so many times, but there's certain fighters that when they feel pain, they wake up. And if you cannot get Julian Erosa out early in a fight, he just takes that and rolls. You look at the Sean Woodson fight, man. That was a dominating performance by Woodson. And you know what? I think that his grappling experience, which is catching up to the striking right now, was very evident in that late part of the fight where Julian Erosa was just able to lock in such a sneaky choke and sneak that win out. I loved every second of that fight because I do like Sean Woodson as a fighter, and I think his last performance speaks volumes on how much he's had to work on with the ground game. But going right back to Julian Erosa, man, that finish was phenomenal. And then he followed that up really, really well, right? I think that for me, I can't get over just the resurgence of Julian Erosa. I think that's the part that makes me extremely happy to see what he's accomplishing. A 25-8 fighter who's only 31 years old. Now is the time for him to be in the UFC, After beating AJ Bryant at Cage Sport, he's now coming in with a big 2-0 victory, 2 finishes. The Nate Landor knee, think about how that fight went for that little bit of time. It was 1 minute of both guys just going straight at each other. Julian actually drops to a knee after taking a big shot. But again, like I just said, if you do not take Julian out, he will wake up. And after that, he is a problem. And so he just goes right back at Nate, who clearly looks like he's kind of gassing just a tad after going so hard at him. And Julian, man, heart for days, durability like nobody else. And he just finishes that fight with a beautiful flying knee up against the fence, right? So that's where, if I'm not convincing you to fall in love with Julian Erosa the way I have, those fights should do it. And I'm not even going back in time to some of the more exciting fights that he's had both in the UFC and the regional scene in the US, right? Last 2 fights, 2-0 in the UFC is his, recent, let's call it his resurgence. But, now he's taking on a real beast, right? What do we love about Seung Woo Choi? You look at the fight against Youssef Zalal, and frankly, that was an absolute demolition in my opinion. I think that, even with Zalal getting my edge on the 6 days notice, I thought that the clinch work up against the fence is where he was going to have some success. But technically speaking, Seung Woo Choi was ahead of the game, man. I think the striking is very much on point. He's extremely powerful and big for the division. That's the one thing I want to mention. He's just really big for the division. And so where I see Julian struggling with this fight is just the overall size and how well Choi is able to push the pace, right? Youssef Zalal can take punches. He can roll with punches. He's actually really, really good in terms of gas tank and defense. And those are the areas where I can really see Julian having to kind of step his game up, with that idea of not going right in there and banging and using head movement and avoiding big strikes. That's going to help him the most. And frankly, in Julian's past, it's just that has not been his strong suit. In fact, like I said, he just really, really preys on the pain, the crowd. All of that seems to do really, really well for him to kind of come back and put on a good show for 3 rounds. So I really think that Seung Woo Choi should have a big advantage in terms of the lines because we've seen him do a lot of work from a power perspective. And if you ask me, those are the areas where I can see someone like Julian Erosa having some trouble, right? Seung Woo Choi throws with power. Those are going to hurt. I don't think that Julian's going to be the kind of guy that just takes damage and like wilts, but at the same time, those long kicks, right? Those long strikes. The way that Julian fights is the best way to win this. Don't get into the brawls. Have a technical striking performance. Outclass him for 3 rounds. And I guarantee you, taking less damage and doing that for 3 rounds is probably going to get Julian a much less boring win than he's used to, but a win's a win. And for Choi, it's like, beat those kicks, man. Get in close. I think that if you get into boxing range, you can really do some damage on Julian. And if you don't land that big power shot to end him early, it's a lot of mix it up, change levels, get him tired. And if you're confident enough to avoid those, grappling exchanges the way that he defeated Sean Woodson, I think that that's your area to really kind of exploit him. Keep him off his feet. That's where he has the confidence. You want to see Julian Erosa gain confidence. Keep punching him, but then watch him land. As he starts to land those kicks and you start to feel the damage, he smells it and he goes forward and he keeps coming. That's the thing with Julian that you have to avoid. You are not putting him away while he's standing in that mentality. And I think that that's where a lot of people have struggled to kind of match his pace and match his durability. Sean Woodson and Nate Landwehr are great examples, right? Nate Landwehr was very much trying to fight his game and got absolutely demolished because of it. And I think that's where, when you're disciplined with a guy like Julian and you pick your shots and you control the cardio and you make sure that you're doing damage on him and beating those kick distances, I think that's the way to really kind of take him apart, because we know that the chin can be questionable, but he's also an absolute beast when he recovers in the moment. And so you have to kind of play with that balancing act to kind of avoid the loss on your end, like the Sean Woodson late finishes, things like that. But then also getting into the big brawls where he's kind of fresh and now throwing flying knees into Nate Landwehr, where he's clearly looking like an absolutely reborn fighter. And like I said, man, if Choi can get him beat up, can get him a little tired, can beat that kick distance and get the fight to the ground, have some confidence to avoid those BJJ transitions and submissions, I mean, I think this is his fight to lose. But again, I would never go against Julian Erosa in the grand scheme of personal opinion, but I really think that this is going to be a fight that's a little bit tougher from a skills and, thought process perspective, because I think Choi really does have a good game plan when he goes in there, and it could be against anybody, right? I think that in that Yusuf Zalal fight, you just saw him be able to really manage a guy who's got cardio for days, was able to land big, avoid any big takedowns, even reverse some. That's the part that really, really impressed me with Choi. And I think that you just have to start taking Korean wrestling very seriously. And so with that said, let's just jump right into these lines, right? And you know what? I respect these lines big time. So we got Choi coming in as a minus 135 opener. And now he's kind of getting close. The highest I see right now is a minus 150. With Julian Erosa opening as a plus 115, I mean, some places have gone down and some places have actually put him up to a plus 120, plus 122 in some places. So I think this is really one of those, again, go through the entire card. I think we've seen only 1 or 2 fights that are outside of that, one minus 150 and plus 120 range of close fighters. So if there's going to be a card that maybe stumps our growth recently, it might be this one, but do the homework. I'm helping you out with that as well. We're going to get the Instagram picks up on Saturday, so use that as a guide. And don't forget the Super Saiyan pick that we're trying to cash out on. But, I think this is going to be one of the most fun fights on the card. And if it doesn't win fight of the night, it probably ended early. Now, I mean, speaking of, if the last fight is kind of like that potential dark horse, the next fight is really who they have to compete with, right? Marlon, Vera, and Davey Grant are about to do battle for the second time. And now in watching that first fight, the things that I absolutely love about that fight, one, little Ecuadorian Marlon Vera looking so cute and young and just really getting a mouthful from Mark Goddard the entire time. I mean, he really was having a bit of a language barrier there. He's come full circle, both in English, both in striking. All of that seems to be coming full circle. And he even mentioned before that fight, man, it's really difficult for him to find MMA training out in Ecuador. And now with Parillo Boxing as one of the main fighters over there, you see him sparring with Mackenzie Dern all the time. I think that that's, he's made that his home. And it's really fun to see just how good they're doing. I think that it's something where his BJJ game, he was a brown belt going into the fight against Davey Grant. And now, we're seeing that striking look so good to the point where Aldo had to take him down to grind out that fight for a win. That's how good Marlon Vera's striking has been getting now, is that Jose Aldo chose to take him to the ground to win that fight. Now, when you go look at Davey Grant, it's kind of the same story, right? He looked like a great striker in that fight, but it's really funny looking at his most recent UFC career, right? You talk about the Jonathan Martinez fight. Everybody thought that he was going to actually go to the ground and try to smite him because of how good Jonathan Martinez is, but guess what? Davey Grant 100% did not feel that way. He openly said before that he's definitely going to try and stand and bag and go for it, and your boy hit the knockout prop like there was nobody's business on that one. You can check that one out on Instagram. It was a really fun night, but that's where you kind of have to gauge some of these fighters. You know, another one I can remember is Aspinall, right? Tom Aspinall has BJJ in some of his tags, but, you know, people are shocked that he submitted Andrei Arlovski at a plus 1,400 clip. Little things like that you want to keep your eye on, right? Because once you get to know the fighters, those little things start to add up a lot more. And in this fight, that's what makes me so excited, right? You're going to see Marlon Vera try to come back from what was a 30-26 across the board in the first fight. Now, he got a point taken away in the third round in a very funny way, too. They did not stop the fight to avoid Davey Grant losing offensive position in that belt. But over the course of the entire fight, I mean, Mark Goddard was getting incredibly frustrated with him, right? Kept telling him to avoid reaching into the gloves. I think it happened twice going into the third round, and the third time it happened, he just, you know, slapped him with that point deduction, which made it a 30-26. But, you know, there were some parts of that fight where just absolutely domination by Davey Grant, and that's where I think Marlon Vera just got so much better, right? I don't think he's going to be so inclined to pull guard anymore. I think he's got crisp jabs. The knees and elbows that Marlon Vera has added to his game are way more accurate, and he throws with volume. You compare the two fighters, and it's just night and day. It doesn't look like the same guy. He looked very, very uncomfortable on the feet against Davey Grant the first time. A lot of, you know, up kicks that were coming from the ground. Then he also threw a couple, you know, more like check high kicks. You know, he was not putting much behind them. You know, when he was on the feet, he tried to throw enough damage on with his hands, but I think he did most of it up against the fence and on the ground when he did have top control a little bit. But Davey Grant, again, was good at transitioning, was good at reversing, and just kept giving Marlon a really tough time in that fight. So I'm super pumped for this one because it's such a great let's do this again type of fight, right? You're going to see two guys who are coming in a lot better. And I will say wholeheartedly, I think Marlon Vera looks a lot better than the fighter that we saw there. I think the trajectory makes sense because Davey Grant was a lot older in that fight, and Marlon Vera was legitimately a UFC prospect, and now he's fighting guys like Jose Aldo. So with that being said, I mean, I'm really curious where this line would be because you think about how that first fight goes, and as much as I want to say Marlon Vera should be a massive favorite, I mean, Davey Grant has looked phenomenal in his last few UFC fights and absolutely like a demolition in that first fight with Marlon. So it's kind of funny to see how this line would look because if it's anything over like that minus 200, minus 180 range, it would surprise me a little bit because you have an example where the other fighter did really well. That's the same reason why I did not understand why Brandon Moreno was a plus 150 in a fight where people kept saying, oh yeah, Figueiredo won the fight, point deduction, blah, blah, blah. That's why the draw happened. But look at the energy. Look at the opportunities that Brandon Moreno created for himself at the end of that fight. I've said it many times. Figueiredo did amazing in the flyweight division, but maybe it's now time to see what he can do at 135. Maybe it's totally in his career he can make that decision. But in this case, you know, we have two guys who are very much in contention in this division, and that's what makes me so excited about it, right? I just think that you're looking at two of the best bantamweights on the planet right now. And, you know, even with Marlon Vera, you've kind of seen him do so well across the board, but this 18-7 record looks completely different than the guy who lost to Davey Grant. Since then, he's only got 4 losses, and it's John Lineker, Douglas Andrade, Yadong Song, and Jose Aldo. So you think about where his career has really come from, and he's born, man. He's born again fighter at 28 years old. He's approaching his prime. That's where I see the edge really going to Marlon Vera. It's just he's done so much since that loss, and with Davey Grant having a bit more of a smaller rise with that Jonathan Martinez fight, I think that's what set this one up perfectly. And it's definitely this fight that's got me the most excited about UFC Vegas 29. So let's get right into these I mean, wow. Could we have described that fight any better? Could we have done any better on this fight? Davey Grant opens as a plus 275 underdog. Marlon Vera comes in as a minus 350 favorite. Davey Grant gets bet up to the point where now he's sitting at a plus 170, and Marlon Vera is now back down to that minus 220, minus 225 range, and some places are even giving it to minus 200. So I even said I would be so shocked if Marlon was well above that minus 200 range, and you know what, he was, and it's coming way back down after people started seeing Davey Grant at a plus 275 after beating him pretty handedly the first time. So I think that the changes in Marlon Vera's game are what's supporting the current line in general, but clearly Davey Grant is getting the bump that he deserves as being an underdog. And you know what, man, I wouldn't be shocked if this fight ends up being a lot closer to a pick'em range where maybe Marlon's coming in at that minus 150, minus 140, because right now that would be considered a huge line movement in the next 2-3 days. But it's kind of crazy to think that a guy who's not only beat him before, but is putting on the performances that he has to come in as such a dog. And so, I mean, I think this is anybody's fight. Marlon Vera is an improving striker, so it'd be crazy to see him knock out Davey Grant, who was the much better striker the first time they fought. But I can only imagine how good Marlon Vera's ground game would be in this one. So in terms of overall edge, you kind of got to give it to Vera, but this line is outrageous, and I think we're going to see, you know, a very good reason as to why it shouldn't be this much of a gap. But with that said, there's your biggest favorite on the card with Marlon Vera. Crazy surprising to me. And, you know, let's just jump right into that co-main event here with Aleksei Oleinik and Sergei Spivak. Now, what's crazy about this fight is, you know, there's certain individuals that I find the UFC puts in a terrible position, right? We talk about some of the older guys that they want to get out of the UFC, maybe putting them against, you know, tough competition. Marlon Moraes just got booked a fight against Merab Dvalishvili, and I'll be honest, man, I feel terrible about that one. You have a guy who just lost twice in a very bad way against two of your title contenders, and then you put him in a third fight against the same type of fighter. You know, where's Marlon's dues in terms of just trying to get a bit of a tune-up fight? But all in all, Aleksei Oleinik's in a similar position, you know, legend of the sport, almost 60 wins in MMA. They don't call him the boa constrictor for no reason, right? The guy's an absolute snake when it comes to the groundwork. He's got long limbs for a heavyweight. You know, he likes to wrap himself around. Anytime he gets that top position on the ground, you can kind of see him really work his old man style of BJJ. But that's what makes him so special, right? To be that, you know, well-versed and flexible and be able to pull that off at the weight class that he's in is really, really impressive. But this is where I just feel like it's just such a terrible mismatch, right? I find that he has a very tough time with those athletic style heavyweights. When you look at his wins in the past, a lot of them come from, you know, I don't want to call them one-dimensional, but your forward and backward type strikers. They're not very fast on their feet, but they're powerful. So it's guys like that he's able to not take too much damage, but walk through the strikes and then be able to pick up, you know, his own game plan, take it to the ground, and just go from there. That's where I see that Oleinik has had so much success as a UFC fighter. And you know what? His career is crazy underrated for how long he's been there. Almost 20 UFC fights under his belt. And those are the little things about him that make me a little weary about this fight. You know, I would have loved to see him fight a bit long in the UFC, but, you know, he's coming off 2 losses right now. And this is what I'm talking about, right? The Derek Lewis fight was a second-round knockout. He actually had some good moments in there, but Derek Lewis is a great fighter, whether you want to believe it or not, man. And that's where he was able to take over once Oleinik got his way, was a bit more tired and took enough damage, right? Now, I'm sorry to say, to give Oleinik Chris Daukaus after Derek Lewis is one of the toughest fights I've seen to date. It's just such a huge increase in talent, right? I mean, Chris Daukaus and Tom Aspinall have to be considered the next up-and-comers behind the Cyril Gans of the UFC heavyweight division. But now you look at him going from Chris Daukaus to now Sergei Spivak. You know, there's so many good things to say about Sergei Spivak here. You know, going into this fight, as much as we want to say that Oleinik has been kind of tossed the wolves a little bit and now getting, you know, another up-and-coming wolf in Sergei Spivak, but look at his body of work in the UFC. First of all, only 2 losses. He lost his debut to Walt Harris via flying knee, and frankly, that is a tough debut for any heavyweight. If you are not ready to strike with Walt Harris, he's going to put you out very early. Now you go to the next loss with Marcin Tybura, who we're now seeing also kind of flip-flop and make his way back into that top 10, top 5 range. That's his other loss. You know, 2 guys that he can learn so much from when it comes to striking at the UFC level and even the grappling and wrestling at the UFC level. And then look at the guys he's beat. This is the best factor about Sergei Spivak. We talk about Jared Vanderaa, Carlos Felipe, and Tai Tuivasa. He beat all of them in very technical ways and exploited weaknesses. And it was phenomenal to see him do it. And look at the fighters he's created by beating them. Jared Vanderaa put on a show against an absolute meanie in Justin Tafa. Tai Tuivasa is looking like a reborn fighter, and the prospect that we all dreamed he would be now, it's starting to happen. Then you look at Carlos Felipe. He avoided those boxing ranges where Felipe just eats people. And now look at Carlos Felipe. He's been working on his speed. He's been working on his athleticism. And now the punches are coming in big, and Jake Collier learned that the hard way. So that's what I love about Sergei Spivak. I think he's one of the most unsung heroes of the heavyweight division. And you could basically see that by the guys he's fighting, and they're just getting better and better. And the fact that he's only lost to Walt Harris and Marcin Tybura so far speaks volumes about a guy who's only 26 years old and about to fight again in the UFC against a big-time legend in Aleksei Oleinik. So for me, he's got the striking advantage. He's actually a really good athlete and great size for the heavyweight division. So for me, it's just, I see such a mismatch here. And the fact that I just saw Marlon Vera come in as a minus 350 favorite, a part of me believes that this guy had to have opened as a minus 400 favorite, because I refuse to believe that Marlon Vera came in as the biggest favorite on the card over Sergei Spivak in a fight against Aleksei Oleinik. Because the one thing I'll say is if Spivak keeps the fight standing, uses his discipline, head movement, gets a lot of damage in early, I don't think that Oleinik is even going to have the true athletic cardio to keep up with Spivak and even get him to the ground or find any of those submission opportunities. I think that Spivak is very good at thinking on his feet. And with the two losses you've seen, I mean, what perfect two losses to kind of gauge your striking at the UFC level and your ground game and grappling at the UFC level. So for me, I don't think there's much to really kind of, paths to victory are just so obvious here for both guys. I think Spivak can win on points. I think he can win by a knockout. I think that he even has the opportunity that if he does so much damage in the first two rounds to maybe even sneak a submission against such a legend in the third round. That's how good I think Spivak should be going into this fight. Now we talk about a guy like Oleinik. He could be on his way out, right? Maybe he's being thrown to the wolves by the UFC. We can't make a comment on that, but he's slowly getting there. Age-wise, career-wise, it's all adding up. And some of these killers at the heavyweight division are trying to feast. And so let's look at this line. I mean, like I said, Marlon Vera opening as a minus 350. I'm hoping Spivak's opening as a minus 400, and I don't care the direction, but come on, man. Crazy to think that Davey Grant's that disrespected by Vegas, but let's take a look. Good God. Good God. Now, we're going to go right ahead and say this is a parlay piece in Vegas terms, if you'd like to call it that. Aleksei Oleinik opening as a plus 210 dog, actually getting a lot of respect and coming back to a plus 175 to a plus 185 dog. Sergei Spivak opened as a minus 250, a minus 250 favorite. And frankly, it's only come down a little bit to about the minus 225, minus 230 range. And I think that comes down to just people seeing that plus 200 and higher on a guy who's fought, almost 60 wins in MMA period and almost 20 fights in the UFC. It kind of, why not, right? But I will say that I think that in this case, I can probably make a call right now. I don't see myself picking Aleksei Oleinik to win this fight. I think Sergei Spivak has not only proven over the recent UFC fights that he's had, but even in his losses, it's just he's really becoming a big name in that division. And I think he's going to be a dark horse to meet some of these bigger names like, Kyle Dawkins, Tom Aspinall, Cyril Gane. I think he's part of that underground crop that's about to really shoot up to the top. And I can probably foreshadow a rematch with Tai Tuivasa because I think Tuivasa is becoming a much better fighter. And in terms of notoriety and popularity, that'll probably be a really good fight for Spivak, win or lose. So keep an eye on that one. I don't think there's much to see there. Maybe even Spivak could jump back to minus 220 or minus 250 or minus 275. I really think that's a high possibility as people start to lay their bets for the weekend. But in any case, I just think it's a very exciting fight for Spivak. And if he loses, it's going to be a bit questionable for his career moving forward. But with that said, let's get into this main event, right? We got Dan Ige and Chan Sung Jung. Now, what's really interesting about this one is not only is it two incredibly great fighters in the division, but, extreme couture and fight ready. That, especially during the pandemic and a little bit before that, Sung Jung has been spending a lot of his time with the Fight Ready camp with some of the bigger coaches under Henry Cejudo's tutelage back in the day. But now you have a great showing once again with Extreme Couture, and he's working with the big names like the Erics and all those guys. Like, it's just such a great fight to headline this card, especially between pay-per-views. I don't think you're going to have a more underrated fight come the month of June, July. But let's get right into it, right? Jung is coming off a tough loss to Brian Ortega. Now, what I actually really disliked about that fight is it seemed like he didn't respect Brian Ortega's striking. I think that Ortega was able to really pick him apart. Again, we just talked about how people tend to learn what their weaknesses are after fighting certain fights. Now, Calvin Kattar and, Brian Ortega in that 145 division are telling themselves, like, even if I want a chance at Volkanovski and to get through Max Holloway, my boxing needs to be a bit better. MMA boxing. I think Calvin Kattar is a phenomenal boxer, but Max Holloway's a machine and can take all the damage in the world and just pushes forward. So for me, that's kind of your ceiling. And now you have guys like Brian Ortega showing off against, classic big time brawlers and strikers like Sung Jung. Now, let's talk about Dan Ige a little bit, right? I think Dan Ige is one of the biggest unsung heroes in the UFC. You want to talk about cardio. You want to talk about some of the names like Edson Barbosa, split decision wins. Like, these are huge fights under his belt. Funny enough, he actually has an amateur loss against Robbie Ostovich, who's actually Rachel Ostovich's brother. Crazy little fact that you probably didn't know, and I frankly didn't know going into this one, but he's built such a great career off of just fighting quality over quantity, right? I think those 3 losses, we talked about the Caterers already. That's where he's trying to get the striking now, and if he can compete now at that level, who's to stop him? Gavin Tucker, that was one of the biggest Vegas robberies I've ever seen. The fact that Dan Ige was so close in a Vegas line against Gavin Tucker. Now, I'm Canadian. I got nothing against Gavin Tucker, but this is the fight business. And if you know what you're talking about, Dan Ige was highly disrespected in that line. And if you kicked his wall on that, congratulations. I can't believe that was even a line to take seriously. I got to be very honest. It was an absolute robbery. But that kind of goes to show you who Dan Ige is as a person, right? Especially as the fighter that we've seen, just such an unsung hero. We talked about Edson Barbosa fights, Calvin Kattar fights. Like, these are title contenders that we're talking about here. And now he's going into a Gavin Tucker fight as a borderline pick'em. Absolutely outrageous to me. And I'll go even further in saying, this is the kind of fight that I want to see Dan Ige, and I want to see him in main events. I want to see him taking on some of the bigger names, because from a cardio perspective, from a scrambling perspective, from an improving striking perspective, the guy's got power now. He's absolutely laying dudes out. So why wouldn't you want to put him on a main card to see what he can accomplish? Because in this fight, I think Sung Jung is very much on the hot seat in terms of where he belongs in the top. When you take this much of a layoff from the UFC, you have to realize that there's killers on their way up. So now coming in as such a big name, he's forced to take on such big name fighters. And unfortunately, the Ortega fight was such a clear-cut example. That was on my birthday, too. Such a clear-cut example as to why he might not be ready for the top 5 at the featherweight division at this point. And now we're going to be talking about a guy like Dan Ige, who very much belongs there. And that's the cool thing about Dan Ige, right? Everything he does seems to be just underdog-esque. I just went off about the Gavin Tucker fight, how that was an absolute robbery of a line. I can't believe Vegas even, put that out there in public, but the guy just came off losing to Calvin Kattar, but then beat Edson Barbosa in a split decision. So I don't know what they were thinking there. If you caked on that too, like I just said, happy to be there with you. But talk about Dana White Contender Series, right? We heard Alex Perez get all that bump for getting into that Figueiredo fight. Best fighter to come out of the Dana White Contender Series and all that. And I like Alex Perez. In fact, I love Kevin Holland too. But there's a very real argument for Dan Ige to be the best fighter to ever come out of the Dana White Contender Series. The guy's record is phenomenal. Quantity is not really there, but the quality is insane. And so that's the part that I'm really surprised that, he's not getting that notoriety that he deserves. And now, boom, main event after 263 against Sung Jung is exactly where he belongs. And I'm so excited to watch him do this because he belongs there. That knockout of Gavin Tucker for me was such a laughable situation because, like I said, I'm Canadian. I got nothing against Gavin Tucker, but that fight, he got an opportunity of a lifetime because if he beat Dan Ige, that's putting him automatically in a top 10 fight. If not even a top 5 based on how he fights, they'll throw him to a really good fighter in a good spot on the card. but Dan Ige is the real deal, and I feel like not enough people are talking about it. And so with that said, let's take a look at these lines. Very simple paths to victory, right? Chan Sung Jung's going to want to brawl. He's going to want to catch Ige. Ige's footwork and scrambling ability and cardio is going to be what keeps him in this fight for 5 rounds. Even if Chan Sung Jung, Korean Zombie, becomes the better striker over the course of those first few rounds, I guarantee you Ige has the skill and athleticism to find ways to make this his fight. That's where the difference lies. And I think that's where Chan Sung Jung underestimated Brian Ortega. And in this fight, even if the striking is now getting back to where it was, I think Dan Ige is just getting to a new level now. And I think he's actually approaching that one, a rematch with Calvin Kattar maybe might be in the cards. I'm loving these rematches for fighters on the come up to kind of make up for the losses, because MMA is so hard to be undefeated in. Praise Khabib. But that's kind of the reality of the situation. I'm sure John Jones would love to fight Matt Hamill one more time to get that W, but according to him, he's probably undefeated. Marlon Vera, Sean O'Malley, same situation, right? But let's see all right. So Vegas, again, I don't think they know Dan Ige very well. I think that this is a very fair line based on how we know the Korean Zombie. This is an even pick'em, man. It has not shifted at all since the line's open. Minus 110 starting, maybe minus 115 on some places. There's even one spot here. Caesar's Palace is actually giving you Dan Ige as the minus 105 dog, with Chan Sung Jung being the minus 115 favorite. So you can get a bit of leeway there. I really do think that this is Dan Ige's fight to win. I think that he's put in a lot of work for this one fight after basically having a training camp for a fighter that I do believe was a fish out of water. I really believe that Dan Ige was far too much of a dominant fighter going into that for him to even entertain that fight. But that's a quick 50K for 50K Ige, and now he's about to come and try to do the same thing. Potential fight of the night if it goes the distance, but watch out for Ige's sneaky power and athleticism. I think it's going to be what dictates the pace of that fight, and unless he gets caught by some of these lucky shots that Chan Sung Jung throws, and let's be real, this man has never been finished either, and that's the best part. And I really think that it's crazy to think that Dan Ige gets this much disrespect in what seems to be one of the best trajectories of a career since a Calvin Kattar loss, who was most recently in 2021 considered a title challenger if he beat Max Holloway. So hashtag for the love of the arts as usual. And as always, man, thank you for the time. That wraps up UFC Vegas 29. We had a great time talking about these fights. I mean, we had such good luck over the last few cards with some of the more mismatches there, but I kind of love when the fights are this close. I love when the lines are this close. It really builds this mentality of exciting fights in my head. Let's keep an eye on that line movement. Let's keep an eye on those weigh-ins. We're going to have the picks up on Instagram as we always do, so keep an eye out for that. And as always, Super Saiyan pick. We're 2-0 so far. Let's go for that 3-0. Lucky hat on. Absolute pleasure to talk about this card. Can't wait for the next one. Peace.